Okay. So I would like to welcome all of our live streamers who are here. We're fortunate enough to have retired Major General Bolden have driven up with his wonderful wife, Marianne. But they have quite a few people from the Desert World Affairs Council who are also tuning in with us right now. So we're thrilled to have everybody with you. Thrilled that you guys obviously were able to make it. And now we're heading on to the main part of the program. So think back to February 24th. For the last couple months, 100 some odd days, the world has been watching what is more than a small border conflict, but instead a horrific, barbaric invasion of a sovereign nation live on our television screens every single night. It has brought the West together in some ways that many of us didn't imagine could have happened a few years ago. It's created heroes, and it's obviously created villains after watching what's taken place with some of the war crimes in places like Bucha. We've seen from the U.S. some unusual approaches that I'm sure will be addressed tonight. I was talking to the General last night about the Haynes, for lack of a better word, Haynes-Burns-Sullivan approach on intelligence that's been put forward. Right away we sent Admiral Mike Mullen with a team of foreign policy experts to Taiwan instantly to be able to have that conversation taking place. And we've watched some countries like Turkey and India basically steer away from kind of coming on one side or another as we try to nudge them to kind of come on the side of the rest of the Western world. Of course, as we know, this didn't come out of anywhere. If you think back to 2015, we were fortunate here in our council. We had two different really special events right after what took place in 2014. We had former ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, came into town and did an event with us, followed shortly thereafter by former ambassador to Ukraine, Stephen Piper, came into town to kind of walk us through what was going on in 2014. Tonight we'll gain insight into that tumultuous time back then, the history before that, and we're also going to be fortunate to hopefully hear where we are now and where things could potentially go. We're fortunate to have someone here tonight whose knowledge and experience in the region dates back decades. Retired Brigadier General Peter Zwack comes to us from this evening as a Wilson Center Global Fellow at the Kennan Institute. But first, a few points on his distinguished military career. He actually served for 34 years in the Army as a military intelligence and Eurasian foreign area officer. He was deployed to as diverse regions as places like Kosovo, West Germany, rather. West Virginia as well, he said, not too bad. Afghanistan and Russia. He's been the recipient of the Bronze Star Distinguished Service Medal, Legion of Merit, and numerous other awards and decorations. In 1999, he was honored as the Joint Chiefs of Staff Action Officer of the Year. And since 1989, on multiple levels, including defense, security, academia, policy, and as a private citizen, General Zwack has developed a hands-on perspective on Russia and Eurasian security, most recently culminating in his position between 2012 and 2014 as the U.S. senior defense official and attaché to the Russian Federation during what was obviously a very difficult and extraordinary time. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to bring up General Zwack. Thank you.
Alive? I think I'm alive. Okay, I'm alive. Jeff, thank you. Lindsay, where are you? Thank you. General Bolden, a real honor meeting you. And I want to also call out Paul Roberts of OC Talk Radio that gave me today an epic 1-hour interview. So wherever you are, put your hand up. We don't have a lot of time. I'm going to bury you in images, maps, try to get at, in a very, very cursory way, the background and then what is going on, my perspective with this grizzly. I use the term tragic, bloody, but heroic, if you will, in many ways, war, and it is a war. There's no way to mince words with what is going on with Ukraine, but war between Russia and Ukraine at this time. There is, but to get at it, I want to go back and talk a little bit about precursors leading to it, and then a slide or two about my origin story related to all this. How the heck did I end up there? How did I end up in Moscow? And I guess with all of this, how I've ended up here. Okay, I'm just going to work the technology here. It will. There we go. Friends, I always, show of hands, and I bet over half. How many of you have been to the Soviet Union or Russia? Yeah, I mean, you are an erudite group, hard crowd, but meaning I don't have to get into all the details and a lot of stuff. But I always, as a foreign area officer, and when I talk about Russia, whether it is to middle school or NSC, I always start and ask people to take a minute and just look at 11 time zone Russia and what it is and how it really is a living, breathing, as you will, function of geography and history. And I think when you do that, we have to always go back to that. 11 time zones, 8 time zones, all the way down to Vladivostok from Moscow. And you've got the Arctic that's melting. You've got half of it is permafrost. And 80% of the population is stacked up in the Urals to the west. And, oh, by the way, it shares a border the size of our border with Canada, with the People's Republic of China. So a lot going on, and a lot of Russia's carved civilizationally out of the hides of nations and civilizations. I have to figure out, there's a master, there's a sensitivity, there we go. This, for me, is the most important, getting at what is going on now, is this, where were you all, think about it, where were we on the night after Christmas in 1991? Because at the stroke of a clock, the Soviet Union, mostly peacefully, breaks up into 15 republics. Russia is the dominant one, but it is now one of 15. And it doesn't even matter if you're not particularly hardline or national. If you're proud Russian, I don't think, my experience, not a lot of them imagine the breakup it would be what it was. And what happens now is that 14 of your republics have broken away to whatever in your mind you think is an empire, and now in those 14 countries, now they're nations. They're about 25 to 30 million diaspora of what you would call ethnic Russians. And in half of those countries, the population doesn't particularly like them. And if you're in Moscow, you are ruining the loss not of only of the territories, but also the people. And you, okay, the slides are getting away from me. Okay, I just showed this is the flag going down, the scarlet USSR, and up goes the Russian flag. There it is, and this is this opening of where U.S. Army foreign area officers are in the Soviet Union right up to this, and it's a group of my classmates. We're in Minsk in the summer of 1990, and we find ourselves in the middle or the front of a May Day parade. We did get our ears pulled back for that one a little bit. And you all know this map. 40, basically, 45, the war ends, 49, NATO, 89, and then the Warsaw Pact recedes. All of a sudden, the former lands of the Soviet Union on the border are now border countries, including Ukraine, and always look at the map, and then there's a lot of baggage. 1989, everything is happening, and by the way, at that time, Vladimir Putin is still in Dresden, and he's watching this all fall apart from their consul in Dresden in the Soviets pulling out of there. This is part of a period where, and there are several of us Army officers, we called ourselves glasnost babies. And we got U.S. government military permission, the counterintelligence guys, and Soviet visas to study in different places. I ended up studying in the provincial city of Kennan, not Kaliningrad, Kennan, now Tver, on the Volga River, and with a small American college group between Brown and University of Rochester and in a Russian Soviet university, and this is the summer. And so we're brought in, and we are like Martians. We are like exotic beasts in this provincial city between Moscow and Leningrad at the time. And this is sort of my window into Russia, because I go back 8 more times between 1989 and 1999 and see and somewhat experience the euphoria, the naive giddiness, and then the increasingly pall of disappointment where democracy for them, most of the honest ones, didn't work very, very well and was hijacked by black marketers and former KGB guys. But yeah, we're out there with the military, with I'm with some Russian majors. I'm sitting there with a Soviet hat in my head. And then we're one night out in the town with some Russians, Americans, and looking. We've just scrounged over 3 days with the lines, enough ingredients to make pizzas. And Pink Floyd, The Wall, was the big record of the time. All right, I've already talked. There it is on the geography. I'm going to move faster, but it's right up. All right, okay. Now, during this time, part of all of this, and this part of the formative years of a young FAO, I go with a young Army captain with me. We're able, because of this visa experience, to fly to Moscow. We rent a Lada in the summer of 1991, 5 months before the fall, the breakup of the Soviet Union. We drive in that pink route all the way from Moscow through Western Russia, Kharkiv, the Donbass, all the way down to Tbilisi. And then we come back up, and the Caucasus is roiling at that time. And then we come up to Sochi, leave the car, and fly back to Frankfurt. But it was an extraordinary time to be on the roads, because even the Russians, the Soviets themselves, including Ukrainians and all, had no idea of this breakup. But this is where it all starts. And I write this book at that time, a period piece about this 10-year period between 89 and 99. And it is a very, very personal passion piece. It isn't big political think. It's about being on the streets with the Russians in this provincial town for 10 years. I then, crazily enough, 2 decades later, never imagined it as a young Army captain. I end up as our defense attaché to Moscow in 2012 and 2014, and these are consequential years. I'd just been served in Europe for many years, been to Kosovo and Afghanistan, and I come out here. And 12 is, and this is the period where they're increasing, there were demonstrations that were being put down, but Ukraine was rising again in the consciousness, and we very, very much lived it. That was and then in 14, of course, the invasion the first invasion, even though you go back in history, there's more than that, occurs. And I'm there having to deal with it with my staff. And I point this out on my staff at that time. Who recognizes that face? We're in Stalingrad, visiting on the 70th anniversary in 2013, and that's Alexander Vindman, young Major Vindman. And we're with a Soviet veteran there, Sextate at that time, Kerry, came out in 2013 trying to work aspects of chemical warfare stuff regarding getting a handle on the Syrians. And so all of this is going on, the war in Ukraine, the first invasion, and then again, geography. You've all seen this map 8,000 times. Take a breath for a second and just look again where it is in context. And Vladimir Putin just mentioned last year, God, if Ukraine goes, meaning if Ukraine goes west, then we have nowhere else left to defend. I mean, that's, the Russians, the general staff and a lot of the old Russians, and a lot of it is contrived, but I think they look at the world in sort of Westphalian red arrows and blue arrows and all of that. But you look at the rest of Europe, how Ukraine sits, and, by the way, Belarus. And then you look, and I, by the way, am an ardent NATO guy, all right? So I'm trying to give a Russian perspective that I don't agree with. But there it is. Geography is everything. And for this, we are there for the first fight. And I'm up on the border regions of Russia, Ukraine at this time with my Foreign Area Officer staff and other international officers. And that's the line that was 23 February of this winter. All right, there it is. The blue had been taken in 2014. And this line held until 2022. I like it in its simplicity. And this is the battles now are pushing out in Luhansk and Donetsk. And this is going to be, continue to be gruesome. But the other big piece, and we're going to get back to it, is southern Russia. Along the river, along the Sea of Azov, Odessa, but Crimea. And Crimea, I believe, is mother's milk for most Russians. I try to make the analogy for a New Yorker or a Washingtonian as Florida is to that, Crimea is to Moscow. Beyond being a strategic base, it's also where a lot of the workers would go for holidays. And so there is a strong sense of Crimea, but though the Russians invaded it and took it in 2014, and I remind that to the Russians, you should have worked with the Ukrainians and not invaded the first time. But this is all going to play out more. I like this cartoon. I think the invasion of Ukraine, and this is after 2014, and 2008 Georgia, which was a precursor to that. I think there's a little bit of truth in this cartoon where Putin has his own dominoes that he's worrying about, which again is playing out now. You all a number of you lived NATO, worked NATO, certainly all been part of it in one way or the other. I've worked long and hard inside of NATO, a big believer in it. I fight, back with the Russians, back and forth, in hard discussions. Guys, Russia, it isn't all about you. This is all about stability also about stability in Eastern and Central Europe, the lands in between. A number of you have read Tim Snyder's The Bloodlands, I'm sure. And that's all, the yellow is all the bloodlands that has just been mangled, invaded, north, south, east, west, invasions, annexations, famine, purges, Holocaust. And these countries desperately wanted to be part of a security system, and that is what was driving NATO in the 90s. And of course, it was here. Then we all were hearing just 5-6 months ago, 7 months ago, these Russian demands that all, you know, that all NATO forces and infrastructure leave those countries in the yellow from 1997 on. Absolutely, absolutely unacceptable demand. But with the demands, one could see that they were almost creating the baseline for justification to invade. All right, and I show this after the NATO map because, again, with Russia, more than any big country in the world, there is scar tissue when it comes to major invasions, conflicts of annihilation. Remember, the Mongols come 800 years ago, basically conquer, enslave the West, including Rus, which was Kiev at the time, and then 800 years later, in the lifetime of the old babushke, the old grandmothers, and this is in the mother's milk of Russia, the Nazis come. And 20 to 26 million Soviets, that includes a lot of Ukrainians and Balts and Belarus and all of that, die unnaturally, at least half of them civilian. The Russians will work this, and I believe that they see the world through a prism of existential threats, some real, many perceived, and then the regime spinning a number of contrived existential threats. But you go to Russia, a number of you have been there, you know, invariably your tour or wherever you were doing took you out to many of these World War II sites and all of that. And then I just like this cartoon because it looks like we were on two alternate universes back in early February. Well, okay, we're talking negotiations, and the Russians are building up and building up and building up. And I think most of us, many of us, including myself, saw it. The indicators were there. Everything looked like that they were going to invade, but just couldn't believe it. It just didn't make sense. And then we know what happened. But all the indicators were there. And that first night, that first 24 hours, this is sort of a weak Russian attempt at shock and awe. You heard about all the missiles, airborne and special forces get into the airport outside of Kyiv, and they fail. But this is what it looked like, and people were wondering how long Kyiv was going to last. 3 to 4 days, a week. Do you remember that? That was just, can you believe it? It was just 3 months ago. And on this, and you've seen a lot of these maps online, the Russians get to Kyiv, right on the suburbs, Bucha and all of that, within days. And that this is a map of what it looked like in Ukraine after the first month. A lot of ground taken in the south. Kharkiv looked like it was possibly going to fall, and Kyiv was still really under siege. But what is going on is that the world woke up, we woke up, and we weren't asleep. And you already mentioned the intelligence community and some key people working with the Europeans and NATO to basically preempt Russian provocations and disinformation to create pretext for invasion, and did that very, very skillfully on the political, military, diplomatic, intelligence side. But on military, but in the first 6 to 8 weeks, it was a veritable flood of systems that on the tactical level could really, really raise hell with Russian formations. And you have for the first couple months, truly a military disaster for the Russians that I think took us all. I think a lot expected them to have trouble. I think everybody was surprised on the sheer incompetence, seemingly, or disdain, or just non-preparedness, as if you just looked down on the Ukrainians and didn't think they were going to fight, and you went in on different columns. And and so their vehicles are getting knocked out by drones and all this late tech, up-to-date anti-tank weapons. They're having trouble with their Air Force. Now the number is, 11 generals dead? Because they're pushed to the front to fight because it's not going well in the communication structure. And the Slava-class cruiser, the Moskva, sunk on the 14th. And what a shock that was. And boy, did the Russians work hard to cover that one up at home, or to talk it off. And you've just read, just last month, I mean, the Russian river crossing in Donbass is just brutally repelled. And so it goes on, but it's bloody and lethal for everybody. I think the critical X factor in all of it, certainly in the early phase, was leadership. And all of you have been leaders in what you do, whether military, business, in whatever that you do. And that young ex-comedian new president rises to the occasion. History sometimes touch people, and they arrive in there, and he didn't leave Kyiv. He didn't leave Kyiv. We all thought he would go. In fact, he was going to be flown out. We were going to help get out. No, he stayed. And he stayed with his inner staff and galvanized his people in the first 96 hours. There's no doubt the Ukrainians were going to fight, but he gave them leadership from top down and a real sense of being, and this was huge. Now you have Putin, who has been, he has not been a particularly inspiring leader. We don't need to get on all of that. But this is, I think, a huge aspect that has been playing out the first couple months. And now we look at this other map. Look at the blue on top. This is amazing. Even those of us that are old intel guys and study all that blue is where the Russians were in March into early April. And they got just rounded on. Long columns, just butchered. Young conscripts, not ready for it, didn't want to be there, and withdrew. I mean, this is quite extraordinary. But the fight is tough. It's brutal. You're reading about it now. The Russians have kind of redirected, called in new leadership. They're having problems too, and you have this is what you're all watching on CNN or elsewhere, where the positions are, where now Eastern Ukraine has become the bloodbath. It's become where the Russians can mass their artillery, do all the things that they're traditionally known to be good at, and firepower, and they have been just pounding on very stubborn, very brave Ukrainian defenders. But here, the Russians do have the statistical edge and firepower edge. The question is, how long can the Ukrainians hang on to the lines up here? I'm going to get this pointer. I've got my crutch, okay? But this is, you're all reading about Severodonetsk. And you can see how fragile it is, where the Russians have been trying to pincer it and then pound it. And frankly, it's remarkable. I would have thought that Ukrainians would pull back just as military guys. This is almost seemingly indefensible. But they've been hanging on. There's word that they may be pulling back. Nobody knows. But they put up a heck of a fight and made it hard for the Russians. Even here, when the Russians massed, the Russians have not been, they've had a lot of their first-line troops that weren't very first-line battered, and a lot of second levies, second string, if you will, forces, call-ups, foreign fighters in there. It's been ugly for them. Nobody's going to know what's happening here. I want to just highlight this because I'm worried about it. This is the south. There's Crimea, and where the Russians have basically taken this. They finally taken Mariupol after an epic 6-week siege battle. And the question is, do the Russians, if they get success up in Luhansk decide that they're going to call, on humanitarian reasons, do they call a ceasefire and ask for a ceasefire along the lines that they're sitting on. This puts Ukraine in a bind. Ukraine doesn't want it. I'm of the mind that you let the Ukrainians fight. Well, it's their fight. It's not let the Ukrainian fight. That's wrong-headed to even say it that way. And supply them all they can to push back at least to the lines that they were on the 23rd of February. But this I worry about as turning into a major frozen conflict. The Russians have been, calling out statelets, talking about referendums. We're going to have to see. We just don't have the time. And when I showed you that southern map, take a look at this. Novaya Russia, New Russia, Catherine the Great, Soviet. This is where how the big thinkers, the messianic ones, Putin, see the South. You look at that. Okay, and so you got that going on, and now the Black Sea. I advise folks to pay attention to it. And it isn't just a military dimension. You've all been watching it. It is also an economic dimension because for everything you've been reading, the Black Sea is the exit point for a lot of Ukrainian grain and other things. Odessa becomes key. The Russians are aligned here. I think it would be a very, very hard slog for them to get to Odessa. Don't know if they'll try. But the Black Sea, you've got Turkey, all right? Turkey is playing it both ways. They are a NATO ally. Turkish drones have been beating up Russian forces. But they also, in their minds, I think, have to coexist. They need Russian money and things like that, so you've got that. But this area and the great question is, will there be, how do you break the blockade? The Russian blockade of these Ukrainian ports that are holding up this increasingly desperately needed foodstuffs for Africa and elsewhere. And Putin is playing a clever game in trying to get the world to feel sorry for them and to enable the Russians to get things out. Some of you may remember the Iranian tanker war with Kuwait back in the late 80s. I wonder if there will be ultimately escorted ships that come out of this area, but that is just supposition at that time. Pay attention to the Black Sea. Cruel months ahead. We're almost at the end. Victory Day became a non-event. Russian reinforcements are headed back, but they are not high standard, but it looks like that they are going to continue to try to grind it out. A lot of forces a lot of Russian youth are being killed. How does that play? And Russians are bringing in more artillery, more cannon in the Donbass, but so are we, meaning we in the West, and we'll have to see how that plays out. Epic Kremlin strategic miscalculation, this invasion for a number of us. Certainly NATO cohesion, which isn't good for the Chinese either. Finland and Sweden, when I did this slide, it's still not 100% done because of Turkey, and apparently there's a Kurd in the Swedish parliament that is going to potentially make things difficult as well. But they should get into NATO. New systems coming in. It's going to be long. It's going to be ugly. But this is something Putin did not count on. And him, 22 years in power, we don't know where he's headed. We don't know how healthy or sick he is. I call him clinically obsessed by Ukraine, by what Russia should be in his mind in the Tsarist image or post-Soviet image. And his leadership, is what we're seeing here. And then he's got an inner circle. And if there's anything about the traditional Russian Soviet inner circles, one, they're opportunists, and B, they're survivors. Okay, so we're just going to have to see how that plays out. The ruble has stabilized, oil prices are up, but overall, the Russian economy is a mess, and it's going to play out in the hinterland. They've actually done a fairly good job in balancing that, but it is not playing well out in the countryside. We've talked about oil and gas pipelines, the sanctions that are coming in, the heavy sanctioning already on natural gas. By the way, there's a China offset, especially for natural gas for the Russians. And of course, the oil piece that we're talking about. And the Russians are trying to work politics and muscling, if you will, realpolitik in trying to get Europeans to bend on the oil thing. And it looks like that oil by the end of the year will cease from Russia, seaborne shipped oil, but certain pipelines will still go through Central Europe, especially through Hungary. What comes next? Friends, what comes next? We talk about, nobody, I think, knows what end state is. Nobody knows how long this thing is going to go on. I think it's going to be quite protracted for some time. Certainly as long as Ukrainians maintain the will to fight, or Putin and the Russians can't get to whatever their acceptable version of winning or success is. But you've got out there war crimes. You've got out there, you've got all kinds of, you've got populations that are quite related that have just been slaughtering each other in Ukraine. How do you come out of that in a near-term peace? I submit on reconciliation, it will be hard for quite a while. Now, just China angle, just because I know a number of you would be interested in that, is, Putin again with Xi Jinping just 4 months ago in front of the Beijing Olympics. I mean, what's extraordinary is we've been talking about these things in recent history. And it isn't even history, it's memory. And so I think that nobody knows what exactly was said. My view is that basically Putin did tell Xi Jinping that they're certainly got a plan, thinking about it, probably no more detail than that. And Xi Jinping probably said some variation, my partner, go, don't get into trouble, and don't screw with my Olympics. And then 10 days later, the Russians launched. I just look at the map because I think China, what goes on is critical. You saw this coalescing of the alliance and everything else, and China has to watch this. The Chinese are watching and learning from the military aspect as well. There are a lot of military lessons learned or unlearned that are coming out, but you just look at the geography and how, and everybody's focused on Taiwan, and we'll just have to see how it's going to go. But they are paying close attention, and the Russians still have that partnership, but China has to be worried that their strategic partner, especially diplomatically and resources and all that, is a bit clay-footed. And that wasn't part of what they thought. This is, we're really at the end here. Weapons of mass destruction. The Russians have been branding it, thumping their chests, and all kinds of exotic systems, but they will remind us, that don't forget, we've got nukes. And I think a lot of this is publicity, but a lot of it is also real. It's expensive, though, as well. Nuclear torpedoes and cruise missiles. They have their functional nuclear triad, which is still the most, with ours, the most dangerous in the world and could end the world as we know it in hours. And I think for Vladimir Putin, when you hear him brandishing and the noise and the, back off, I love this cartoon because I think it's exactly what he does. And everybody, especially early in the Ukraine conflict, backed off. But increasingly, I think we're seeing, not just in the United States, but also in the West, we're going to support the Ukrainians. We're not going to go to war with Russia, but we're going to stay in that fight. How many of you have seen or remember the record, Tom Lehrer, That Was the Year That Was? If you haven't, go listen to it. It's zany, it's mad, it's also real. Just like, you know, the movie Dr. Strangelove that came out at the same time. It's of that. And then finally, my two books, one again, Swimming the Volga, which is all of this, and I also was in Afghanistan, and that is a whole nother story. That, oh, by the way, we learned a lot and didn't learn enough from the Russian experience. I end always with the map that I begin with, and I will stop here for questions.
Okay. I'd like to bring up really quickly a longtime supporter of the council, one of our trustees, someone very well known here in the Orange County community, both in the business area, the philanthropic area, and of course the academic community here in Orange County, Dr. Mark Chapin Johnson. As you can tell, he enjoys doing this. We enjoy having him, and we're looking forward to this conversation.
I love it. You don't know me well enough to think that I would be gratuitous, and I'm not being gratuitous. He gets it. I have listened to so many presentations over the past few months about that area of the world because I'm deeply interested in it, and that was the most direct, complete, comprehensive explanation in that length of time that you could come up with. I was going to nail you with all sorts of questions of my own, but you already answered them all. I will share one thing at the beginning, which isn't a question. Harrison and I had the opportunity a few weeks ago, and I don't recall how we stumbled on it. Oliver Stone is not one of my favorite people, but that doesn't matter. But Oliver Stone spent dozens and dozens of hours one-on-one with Vladimir Putin over a period of 3 years from 2015 through 2017. And he condensed them into 4 interviews of a little over an hour each. It's one-on-one. They're done at the Kremlin. They're done at Sochi. They're done at the Victory Day parades of May 9th. They're done in different places. If you want a direct understanding and insight into who Vladimir Putin appears to be, watch those interviews. They are mind-boggling. Have any of you seen them? Look at that. And they're free. They're on YouTube. And I'd never even heard of them until recently. It will give you an insight into this man, not good, bad, right, or wrong, but just you will see somebody that you've read all about or heard about in an entirely different way. And I will leave it at that. So the first easy question, which came from several people, what do you think we should do?
No, it's...
You knew that was coming.
Yeah. I think that there is, first of all, this war and the end state, there's several different outcomes. And I think that we have to remember that ideally, we continue with our allies to support Ukraine in the word is stronger than its desire, but its aim, its push to take back the land that was taken up to the 23 February border. Now, there's a bigger question out there, because what about the border beyond that? That gets all the way back out right onto the Russian border, and there is no Russian Donbass. Or, which I think would end in a major war, no Russian Crimea. I think so any negotiation from my American view, and NATO, and European, and when I say NATO, it isn't just NATO, friends. It's free-minded nations, like-minded nations, EU. I try to get this out of the NATO-Russia dimension. This isn't just about NATO and the US, because they like to vilify us that way. So how it ends, I don't know. I don't know, but I think that we need to continue what we are doing. We can go back and forth, and should the missiles fire out into Russian terrain or not? Those are really important questions, but it isn't going to define what happens inside Ukraine. Long answer, short question. We support the Ukrainians. We continue to shore up our alliance. We have to continue to work to shore up our populations. This is one thing in the United States that I've been pleased with the bipartisan support, but when I come here to California, and I'm one that supports what we're doing, and I see $6.50 for regular gas, I know that support and sympathy for foreign lands that for some is abstract is hard. So stay the course and do whatever we can not to get ourselves into a major war with Russia. Finally, I think there are two major existential fights right now. I believe the Ukrainians, unless something horrible happens, it's hard to see it, have succeeded in saving their nation as a nation that will be independent and free out from under a Russian yoke or absorbed into Russia. The problem is it will all of Ukraine be that way, or will there be a frozen conflict? So that's existential fight number one, is the survival of Ukraine, and I think on that they're winning. B, and I think this is the strategic one, and you have to be so careful in the terminology, is how does the free-minded world push and work truth to break through the firewalls in Russia? Because I think that the Russian population and the less hardcore, but even those in the regime, how do you break through when they and all of a sudden they just and that is a huge issue. People will ask, "Oh, regime change." No, don't go there with the Russians. Don't go down that discussion. I say that anything discussing changing a regime in Russia is Russian business, and let's leave that to the Russian people.
Excellent. You actually started to answer a question that was asked in several different ways. We have an impression in the West based on, well, our perception is that the masses of Russian people are given such structured information through state media there that they really don't know what's going on. Do you sense that that is really the case, that they don't know what's going on? And to the degree they do know what's going on, which I think is probably greater than we realize, is it your sense that they, as a matter of culture, support what's going on?
All right. I go back to my book, Swimming the Volga, which is all about the Russian people in this provincial city, and I know a lot of them. I've stayed in touch, though I have not been in touch with them during this war because I have not wanted to get them into trouble. And they're, like anywhere else, anywhereville America, they're good people. They're basically out there doing the thing. They are patriotic Russians. They desperately want to believe in their president. They desperately want to believe in their nation, the righteousness of their cause. And I think that firewall is beginning to chip in places. We've seen it. They're in denial. They don't want to hear it because the sinking of the Moskva got out. The body, you can't. There's one thing. 20, nobody knows. 20, 25,000 dead Russians. Most of them under like 24. That sifts in. Yet the Russian disinformation machine is powerful and has been able to stir them. Fight for Mother Russia. This is I talked about World War II and how Stalin rallies the Soviets against the Nazis. This is all about the Victory Day, which was an anticlimax this year. All of that is in play. It takes time, though, Mark. It takes time. And the tragedy in a time thing when you're dealing with a population that you hope wears down, the bill payers are the Ukrainian people, the civilians that are dying in the thousands, not to mention the Ukrainian military.
One of our guests brought up what to me is a fascinating question. It's, I don't want to call it politically incorrect, but it's pretty incisive. One of the things I'm aware of and have learned a little bit about is this concept or this reality that different parts of the Ukraine have dramatically different cultures. Western Ukraine, much more European, Eastern Ukraine, much more Russian. And one of the guests here has pointed out that they have had contact with people that they know in the eastern areas of the Ukraine, and that the attitude there amongst the people they know is that Zelensky is terribly corrupt, the Ukrainian government is notoriously corrupt, and that there is a tremendous amount of support in those Russian areas in eastern Ukraine for sovereign independence. That is a question, actually.
And that certainly exists, yes. We saw it in 2014, and part of the trope, part of the narrative back then during the Crimea and the first fight there is we were on Russian television just bombarded, meaning a Russian citizen, with these images of ethnic Russian women crying and babies, get caught in an artillery strike, and then they will portray. At that time, the Ukrainians it was all hands on deck, 5-alarm fire, and everybody was fighting, including right-wing Ukrainian nationalists, of which the Azov Regiment battalion comes from in Mariupol, though a lot of work in the last 8 years has been done to put them back, if you will, into the mainstream. So all of that is playing in there, and leading up to the invasion 3 months ago was exactly that the Ukrainians are going to attack eastern Ukraine, the Donbass. The Russians were building up a narrative that we got to get in there preemptively to preempt the Ukrainians with US and NATO support, because Ukraine is our proxy, that we're going to go in and to clean out those Russian ethnic populations. Yes, a lot of them are diehard. The war has been fought over them. Where they are behind Russian lines, or it's not good. But they would say that the Russians, well, this is all the Ukrainians' fault, this death and dying. So it's a mess. It's ugly. Anytime you get it's almost a civil war in many ways. And these are Slavic brothers and sisters. It's ugly.
You raised a word that isn't in any of the questions, and I apologize in advance for asking this, but could you describe what the Azov Regiment is?
Okay. The Azov Regiment, Azov Battalion, I don't want to give a history lesson. Okay.
You know why?
Yeah, all right, give me 2 minutes. All right? Why are the Ukrainian, how did the Russians miscalculate on the Ukrainians, on this fierce resistance? Well, let's go back just less than 100 years ago. And let's go back to the early days of Stalin and industrialization and collectivization. And you have something a number of you have read about or seen called the Holodomor. That was the Ukrainian Holocaust. And it was there that the Soviets, Russian-dominated, clamped in Ukraine, forced farmers, independent freeholders to bend, and they starved out in a great famine. Ukraine estimated 4 million dead, plus or minus 500,000. Nobody knows the number. Robert Conquest, a number of you have read the book, Harvest of Sorrow, which is about, so what happens In the Second World War, Barbarossa, the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union, a number of the initial German panzer columns are met with bread and salt by Ukrainians. And so most fight for the Soviet Union and Stalin, but some fight or are sympathetic to the Nazis. And then the war ends in a grotesque, ugly partisan war. And then in the 50s, 40s and 50s, Stefan Bandera, and you had these Ukrainian nationalists, right of center, fighting the communists. And then they're finally snuffed out. And then, so Azov, so there's always been, like in our country too, these strains of right wing, and that is what this unit was in 2014. I know for a fact US and NATO worked hard with the Ukrainian government and military to get all that stuff under control. However, to end this long soliloquy, at the epic siege of Mariupol that ended a few weeks ago, one of the two main units, one a Marine unit, was the Azov Battalion, Azov Regiment. That was the, if you will, the core, the antecedent, the followers of this original. And now these guys may be hauled off, and you're reading about it now, for, if you will, special tribunals and things like that, and not treated well under the Geneva Convention, and that will be so there is a lot of fascist, all this stuff. I mean, the fact that Putin called Vladimir Zelensky running a Nazi fascist, sympathetic regime. That there's Jewish. But this is there. It's the history. It's the history of the bloodlands, and will run deep, and it runs deep in Eastern Ukraine. I'm sorry, it was long.
No, that's great. Thank you. And it highlights what Putin is saying about the denazification of Eastern Ukraine, and he's focused on the, amongst other things, the Azov Regiment. The next question seems simple, but it's really not. We view everything through the lens of the time right now, the war this month, next month, last month. Putin's 70 years old. He's not going to be around long. I don't care if it's good health or bad health, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is. What does it look like with your knowledge of the Russian Kremlin hierarchy when he's gone? Because this is going to go on for a while.
Well, half of the people in this room were either real or amateur Kremlinologists during the Cold War. And we'd all look at the Russian leaders stacked up on Lenin's tomb, and we'd be parsing out who was next in the line of succession. I don't know. But but the answer is you have Patrushev, Nikolai Patrushev, former KGB, FSB, who is a national security advisor. And you have this cabal around him, and they are tied in tight. But I also think that and he is particularly hardline. And then you have others that I think are going to emerge. It's not a good thing in Putin's Russia, in Putin's Kremlin, to emerge as a potential successor to Putin before your time. Okay, and so I think that folks are still pretty quiet and circumspect. It's a great question because people are thinking about it, and this could play out in a number of ways.
Particularly in the Kremlin.
In the Kremlin, and a lot of the inner voice, I think for people is again, God, sometimes things happen. You can't plan on it or whatever. Is somewhere the Kremlin takes care of the problem themselves.
I was hopeful that you had the opportunity, like one of our presidents, to meet him and look him in the eye and say, I can work with this guy.
I met him at the Stalingrad thing, a handshake, that was it. He wouldn't know me from Adam, except I was wearing an army blue dress uniform for the 70th. But that was in the days when he would actually get out a little bit and see people.
Before COVID.
What? Before COVID, and now he is, he's in a bunker. I worry about a Putin that falls into a Führer bunker mentality when if somehow the world starts to collapse around him, and I'm speaking a small group. I haven't gone on the media on that, but I worry that with all the whether he is ill or not, he's under enormous stress. Yeah. Enormous stress. It hasn't gone well in any way you look at it. Yet they've somehow gotten their balance, if you've noticed, at least in the near term. And if there's anything we know about the Russians, and we saw that in the Second World and other periods, they have staying power, and they're stubborn, but they can snap viciously, like unexpectedly, like they did twice in the last century, in the October Revolution and in 1989-90.
You touched on, and there were several questions that came up that call for an expansion of something you touched on. Where do you see China vis-a-vis Taiwan right now, and the probability of what can happen there based on what's happening in Ukraine?
No, thank you. That's why I put the China map up, because this is far more than a European thing, and I keep wanting to write an article called the U.S., Russian, Chinese, Indian quadrangle, because clearly as there are huge implications for the non-Western world in this, and Asia being paramount. As I touched on before, I think that China, and I'm now in the world. It's the road to perdition when you get into a world of supposition and all that. I think they're having to do a real assessment or reassessment about any immediate plans they had regarding Taiwan. Russia's a mess, and they're going to have to sort themselves out. And I've always thought that certainly in the last 15 years, that the one thing the Russians and the Chinese did not want to be in this bigger world is fully isolated without one or two semi-competent partners. Meaning China wants to know that its flank is covered, and it doesn't just militarily, it's diplomatically in the UN and all of that. And so this is, you know, people are saying, well, this is going to drive Russia closer to China. If so, so be it. But China is having to be very careful. We talked about the Belt and Road Initiative earlier, and the Chinese, I think, are going to have to pull in. They've had now their COVID challenge, and their economy is kind of reeling right now. But from a military, from my world, there are a lot of lessons learned and unlearned in what's going on right now in Ukraine. And I think and also, I think that they saw that there would likely be a very strong, not force-on-force combat, support for Taiwan if the Chinese were really going to try to invade, as we've just seen with the support for Ukraine. And it won't be just the United States.
I certainly have no clue if Xi is more competent than Putin, but he certainly appears to be a little bit more controlled in his behavior. Coming back just for a second, I'm going to mention, if you do get a chance, I don't get a commission, I don't care. If you get a chance to watch the Oliver Stone interviews of Putin, one of the things that will surprise you, and it stunned me, because it's long and it's very real. For better or for worse, Putin is incredibly intelligent. He knows history, and in these interviews, he speaks about history back to the time of the Roman and the Greeks, and he has an incisive knowledge of how Napoleon handled the French military. I mean, it's really quite remarkable. I'm not sure what to make of it, but it's very informative.
And he speaks languages.
Oh, you watch the interviews, and there's an interpreter there, and before the interpreter's finished, he's just smiling, laughing, because he already knows what's being asked. I saw trivia for today that relates to what you were just talking about. West Texas Intermediate oil today was $120 a barrel, give or take. In the past 60 days, India has increased 6-fold its importation of Russian oil, because Russia's giving it a $40 discount to the rest of the world. That means they're paying $80 for it right now, which is $20 more than they were getting before they invaded Ukraine. What that means is they now have more cash to fund that war than they did when they started it, and we're in disarray in the West. And we have more than enough energy in the United States to take care of the problem ourselves, but we're not doing it. Will Odessa hold, and if it doesn't, what are the ramifications?
Yeah, it's a great question. I have a map of it right, should be really close. Defeated by technology. All right, Odessa. Is the computer turned off? Or? No, I don't want to see him. No, okay, disregard. The Odessa, again, there you go. We just stop right here. God darn it. Could you? We're almost there. There you go. Oh. Yeah, okay. Right there. Want to get the other map. All right. Odessa. It has not been, and everybody really worried about it. I think that if the Russians were to consider a ceasefire, it will be, if they could hold what they have taken in the south, finish their business in the Donbass in eastern Ukraine, somewhere in there they might want to work a negotiation so as to freeze this line that we see here. Odessa will require another major lunge of about 100 miles. Increasingly, and we talked about while along the coast it is more ethnically Russian, but deeper into Western Ukraine. It just gets harder and harder, and I don't think that the Russian military have the legs to do it right now, based on what this grinded out fight in eastern Ukraine, and we're seeing the counterattacks that are going on with the Ukrainians in this area. This is the area that I believe the Ukrainians want to, if they can get the forces in, they want to try to push the Russians out, because it's here in Kherson and out toward Melita where the Russians want to create new autonomous republics, new referendums and all that, and really claim this for Russia. Then it becomes a problem, because now you've got the Black Sea that with all the food and trade and everything else, and here is Odessa. And Odessa is in many ways the gateway to the NATO's Black Sea, but this is where the main stuff goes down to the Dardanelles and the Bosphorus and out to the world and most of Ukrainian grain. So I think the Ukrainians will fight bitterly here. I think the Russians' best chance to get Ukraine was about 2 months ago, and I think these lines have solidified, and everything we're hearing about the Russian forces in the area, they're not that good. And you also have, where you see these big red blobs, that means the Russians are out on the fringe, and you got little tendrils of supply. But this is also partisan country, Ukrainian partisan country. So this is hard for the Russians.
As of this afternoon, there was 26 million tons of wheat sitting behind the blockade at Odessa that had been loaded to go to Africa, where already there's serious starvation beginning. It's going to get much worse.
And that is something the Russians, I believe, are going to try to leverage, and then pull that humanitarian card and try to get a result here. Great point.
You just touched on something that others were asking about. You pointed out, I had to laugh, the Kurd in the Finland or whichever the country.
It was in Sweden.
In Sweden. I had to study the Kurds, but that's another time. And I can only imagine the issue there and with Turkey vis-a-vis NATO. What happens with NATO going forward? I understand that in some ways it seems to have been incredibly galvanized together, but probably the primary issue in Europe right now is more than Ukraine, actually, is their economic vulnerability because of energy, and that energy which is now being divided differently. Hungary, Oman, and others who are saying, no, we don't want the war, but don't mess with our economy. How do you see this affecting the cohesiveness of NATO going forward?
It's, I think the longer this goes on, I think this is exactly what the Russians are banking on, maybe the wrong word. And will the Russians break, or will the West break first? I don't think the Ukrainians are going to break. If the Ukrainians, breaking them, it means they'd be grinding them down in a massively bloody fight. Russians are brittle for the reasons, as tough as they are, they're brittle. But I worry about, and you're seeing European leaders. I'm one that fundamentally, on a human level, came out in the book, likes the Russians. On a human and personal and cultural level. Can't stand the regime, it's monstrous and needs to go out in the ash heap of history. Saying that, I think that we have to, going back to the earlier point, hold the line here as long as the Ukrainians want to fight. And I think we're going to, and part of that holding the line will be it will be Europe, our own country, saying this isn't worth it. Let's make a deal. We're open-minded to you. Let's find a way for Vladimir Putin to save face. And I kind of bristle when I hear that. Because save face for what? For an invasion, an aggression, world-class, that we haven't seen in the Western world in our lifetimes, and not since the Second World War. So no, I don't buy that. Somewhere out there, there will be a logic. They'll pull together. There will be a demarcation line and a negotiation. But I'm uncomfortable with let the Russians save face, let Putin save face. And I think that takes the narrative a different way.
Well, I agree with you for whatever that's worth. Of course, I remember what you said earlier about how people react when there's $6.50 gas here, but actually you missed it. It went to $7 this afternoon.
Wow.
In your opinion, I thought this was an interesting question. In your opinion, why did our intelligence agencies seemingly completely overrated the Russian forces' ability?
Yeah, okay, that's fair. And I consider myself part of that world. What we saw in 2014, 2015, 3 operations that the Russians conducted. One, with amazing deception, quite flawlessly in Crimea, bloodlessly. 2, a kind of an ugly but successful fight in supporting proxies in Eastern Ukraine the first time. And then it turns into an 8-year fight. And then 3, we saw the Russians pull off, seemingly, they bailed out Assad in Syria in 2015 and do it pretty well. And where the Russians are stealthy in the first 2 operations, they come into Syria pounding their chest, white, blue, and red, and with the missiles coming in over the horizon, strategic bombers, and they pull it off. And there are a lot of Russian exercises that are going on, big Cecil B. DeMille productions, a lot of new stuff that's coming on, and there is a lot of reform going on and military science But when it got down into the application of putting this into reality, the Russians, sir, haven't been in a major operational level frontal war since Second World War. Yeah, they postured in the Cold War with big, but in 600, 800-mile formations, they haven't done it. And so they went in kind of haphazardly with 200,000 plus or minus soldiers. Was way too few for the tasks given to it. From 4 different ground military districts, the Eastern, Southern, Central, and Western, all with its own leadership, all with its own supply chain. No sync except the general staff, which is why they brought this guy in 10 weeks ago. And then they go in and they meet resistance. They're on a land where a people that have been told that they don't deserve to exist and we're going to snuff you, basically. And they weren't ready for it. And the Russian conscripts that come in, a lot of them, or just junior soldiers, even junior officers, are rolling in, and they're meeting crazy resistance. And they are fighting on the soil of another nation that doesn't want them there. All of this in aggregate, it turned out, and then the new weapon system and the West pulling together, it turns into a fiasco. There's so many reasons. But getting at the question we didn't see, no, I think most of us saw the Russians as better than what they were. I thought that they were better. I knew they had major flaws, but their incompetence shocked me too.
Well, last observation at the moment. I had the opportunity several weeks ago to have an exchange with generally a very good friend of mine, Jim Mattis, who had been asked to go to Belgium, to go to Brussels a week before the invasion. And they invited him in, and he sat down in one room with the heads of all the European nations privately, and they asked him what he thought was going to happen. And he was adamant and he was unequivocal. And he said, Putin is going to invade. You are going to go to war, and if you don't do something now, it's going to be horrible. And they said to a person, nah, not really, he won't do it. How do we deal in the West with that kind of naivete, if there's probably a better word?
I think that you find this in corporations, businesses, and the military is that. You have to fight consensual thinking, consensus, and that's why. And you need almost occasional, what we call it, you need to listen to your voices in the wilderness. You need to have in all your businesses. You have a red team, we'd say in the military, where that will give alternate points of view. But there was a consensus. We saw it. I saw it. Yeah, they're there. All the indicators there. And then you try to extrapolate it in your Western mindset. It makes no sense. And I just remember, all of us remember, this is under 4 months ago, friends. We're all kind of divine what they're going to do. It's all there. And the groupthink, that was the word I was looking for, and I had a toe in that world and a toe in the realist world that said, no, this is crazy. And a lot of Europeans who know the Russians pretty damn well, but I also think there's also wishful thinking.
It doesn't get any better than what you've presented tonight. I'm done. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I said I need a drink. I'm done. God bless you, and thank you all for bringing me in. Thank you so much.
So hang on one second. I'm going to have you come up for a little gift that we always give our speakers. General Zwack. We're going to keep you up here for popular demand. So obviously the passion, the knowledge of decades working on the subject came through tonight. You may be retired, but you have an awful lot to give to our country. I encourage you to continue going around to the different communities because people need to be able to hear this. It's been important tonight for everybody here. We want to present you, and I do warn you to be careful so it doesn't come tumbling out on us, but one of our orange globes that we present on nights that I can get it out to all of our speakers here who come through Orange County. So
That's really lovely.
thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
So much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, enough of me.
You're welcome. Thank you. So I actually cracked a couple of these open yesterday. And I encourage you to do the same. There are some books here this evening. There's also some books that obviously you can go on Amazon of his time in Russia, his time in Afghanistan. But they're personal memoirs, very different read. This is not an academic read. This is something that will actually keep you up. And I encourage everybody to pick up a copy of the book. There's some over there. Also, as you're on your way out, if you're wondering how to get more involved with council, Morrow, raise your hand. Mara will have some sign-ups over there for folks to be able to join committees. We have a program committee, we have a membership committee, we have a PR committee. We'd love to double the size of this room, and we could use everybody's help and your different skill sets to help us do that. So thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for coming all the way out. Thank you to the Kennan Institute for the new relationship that we have with them. They'll be sending out more experts as we go forward. And thrilled everybody's finally back out here in person. Thank you for coming out. Drive safe. And we look forward to seeing all of you on the 23rd at Mr. and Mrs. Fred and Mary's house. Thank you.